Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Sharlee Dixon, and joining me today is Peter Fenger. Hey, Peter.
Hey, Sharlee, how are you?
I'm doing well. And welcome to BHT Bytes, where we break down mental health and societal trends into quick, digestible conversations, keeping it informative, relaxed, and relevant. So let's just jump in. They used to call it the gold watch retirement. The idea that you give a company 35 years of your life and they give you a pension, a plaque, and a handshake. My mom lived that reality. She spent over 3 decades with the same employer. But for most of us listening today, that story sounds less like a career plan and more like a fairy tale, or maybe even a nightmare. In the final months of 2025, the unemployment rate is hovering around 4.5%. But that number doesn't tell the whole story. Between the yo yo cycles of a prolonged recession in 2009 and the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, the American worker has been through the ringer. We're facing skyrocketing healthcare costs and the looming shadow of a Social Security deficit just 10 years away. It's no wonder the way we show up at the office has fundamentally shifted. Enter quiet quitting. While critics say it's just a new name for an old lack of engagement, a 2023 Gallup report suggests a staggering 59% of the global workforce is doing the bare minimum just to get by. Is this a lack of work ethic, or is it a rational response to a market where career jobs never actually existed for most of us? Today, we're deconstructing the modern labor market, the truth about job hopping, and why the safe career path might be the riskiest move you can make. So, for definition purposes, quiet quitting is considered doing only the bare minimum of a job requirement. So, not going above and beyond, period. So, example, you're only working during work hours, you're not answering or responding to emails before your work time starts or before you leave your home, 7 o'clock. You're not doing any of that. You go to work and then you do your work and you leave. And then at night, once your daily responsibilities are completed at home, you're not jumping back on to do more work. Once it's over, it's over. Furthermore, it's not thinking about work at all once you leave the office. So, not feeling any bit of anxiety when it comes to requesting time off, taking personal days, or especially taking sick times. You're literally just doing the job and going home. You have time to do everything else that you'd like to do. So, generationally, we often praise the 30-year tenure of our parents' generation. I know I did. We call it loyalty. But looking in the current economy, was that loyalty a choice, or was it simply a byproduct of a more stable social safety net that no longer exists, right? So back then, or I'll say again, my parents are in their 70s, and my mom's recently retired, maybe in the last 5 or 6 years. She was a teacher for 30 years. Worked in maybe only a couple of schools, but for the same employer, same school district. Did she really have other options? Did she stay in that space because that's all that was there? And on top of that, realistically, wages have not risen with the rate of inflation. So while it appears that we are getting paid so much more than we used to, that actual purchasing power of American workers has grown at a much slower rate. So we're looking at rising costs or skyrocketing costs at this point of housing, secondary education. And when you're factoring things like childcare that could be what we were paying, in my personal story, what we paid for childcare for a 5-year-old here was our mortgage a few years ago. If that gives you an example of how much childcare
Wow.
costs can change in a few years or even a different state, right?
Yeah, wow.
Thousands of dollars a month. And this isn't private school. This is, daycare. So once you add all those things in, even though we're making more money, we're spending a lot more money as well. So is that loyalty? Was it a good choice to have? Like, what are your thoughts on that, Peter? Like, what does that loyalty look like? Is it worth it?
It's interesting because we are skirting this line between being employed because we have to
Mm-hmm.
and being employed because we want to,
Yeah.
right? I think that we go into our careers because there's some general interest,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes, the work environment keeps us trapped, not because like, oh, we're overworked and therefore we have no time to look for another job.
Yeah.
But, as you pointed out, like there is uncertainty in this world, right?
Yes.
We've seen unemployment rise to 4.5% and not dip down despite that we're not in COVID anymore
Right.
or other factors, right? We're not in a recession,
Mm-mm.
yada, yada, yada. And so I think for younger folks, we talked a little bit about generation, like we're trying to do our best.
Yeah.
I think that the idea of a career has changed to
Mm-hmm.
where it's not necessarily focused on I'm in my line of work, I have an employer that's going to help me grow.
Yeah.
Sometimes the limitations of your employer is that there's no growth opportunities, right? There's nothing left for me. Or like you mentioned, that the benefits of working is not quite moving with the rate of inflation in the rest of
Mm-hmm.
the economy. And
Yeah.
so, sometimes people are switching jobs because they have to, that there
Right.
has to be a better paying job
Right.
because the current one is not fit for this type of economy. So,
Mm-hmm.
there's a number of different reasons why, I think we're starting to see this shift. But I also think that younger generations are being brought up as that is like the new normal. But I don't necessarily know if that's the truth. I think in my own research, is an older generation sticking to jobs because they just didn't have access to the number of jobs that are available,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or do we just have access to more opportunities now? I think it kind of goes back and forth. It's my understanding that there is just as much job turnover as there was then as there is
Mm-hmm.
now. And so to say like, oh, a younger generation just doesn't have the same grit and determination to stick
Mm-hmm.
with a
Work
job,
ethic.
I don't think that
Mm-hmm.
that's very
I agree.
fair. But I also think like there's a new standard to how people are defining their careers.
Yeah.
And, I think like the research is showing that like most career paths will involve multiple jobs.
Absolutely.
I think I've seen a source that says like a person's career path is going to include 9 or more positions.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. And
Yeah,
and honestly is I completely agree with you because I thought I went into, social work and the education system thinking to myself, again, my mom was a teacher, 30 something years. In my head, I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm going to come in, I'm going to, be this social worker in this school system. I'll work at multiple schools over my time, but I'll retire from here because retirement is decent. That's cool. I get in it young enough that I can, leave in my 60s. And this is great. This is perfect. This is what I need it to be until I switched, I thought, this is kind of boring. Maybe I want to try something different, right? After 12 years. And then I look back at that like, oh, I probably shouldn't have stayed that long. It might have
yeah,
actually not been beneficial for me career wise. So it was almost like
mm,
I left it and the start over after
mm,
having 12 years of experience might have actually been worse or harder on me than when I first came out of college. It was quite interesting to see that shift in what I thought was going to happen. And you can translate easily these 12 years of experience into something else. But then
mhm.
I guess I'd pigeonholed myself into this is the type of job, the only one that you can do. And so
Sure.
switching to something else became a much harder reality to face than I thought it would. And so that idea of, you get one job, you stay in it. I wonder if people stayed for that same reason or for the opposite of that reason. I don't know that I can do anything else. This
Mhm.
has been easy. I might as well stick with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that there's like a level of not compliance, but
Mm,
like, a solid foundation, something feeling familiar.
yeah,
One of the
yeah,
things that you also mentioned, and I think it's also maybe different from your mother's experience to ours, is that when she worked for her employer, was it her employer the entire time, or did they go through different purchases? Right. I'm thinking about, my own employment, right? And
yeah, yeah,
my employer has changed hands to other employers with different leadership and different CEOs because the nature of the business has just bought and sold and bought and sold. And so,
mhm,
where I might have had the same person who's paying my paycheck, the people that own and pay my paycheck has changed hands,
yeah,
two different times. And
yeah,
so, where I have kept my employment, it's also included a less than stable foundation in that time.
And so then while the employment is technically the same, it's really not like the
Right.
description may have changed over time. Yep.
Right. And I mean, and as I think of those moments, those are the moments where I've seen a lot of turnover.
Hmm.
I've seen people leave the job because the leadership is not the same. Or you could stick around and say, this is a new leader. What can I learn from them? And then
Right.
try to build upon that. So yeah,
Right.
I think it's different. I don't think that my parents had the same experience. I think they were very
Mm-hmm.
much like your mother, where there was safety in,
Mm-hmm.
in sticking with their employer. And when there were times when my dad was looking for another job or was considering another position somewhere else or wanted to pursue his own happiness, there was like a lot of turmoil and
Yes.
anxiety attached to that because there was just so much familiarity. I mean, I think he
Mm-hmm.
stuck with his one company for the majority of his career, but in that time, like considered other options and always went back to the same one. But I also think like there was different perks. I
Mm-hmm.
know that there was like a pension and a 401k and stuff like that. And honestly, like I didn't get paid in 401k until like the midway of this current position. The first owners didn't even offer those perks. And
Wow.
so,
Okay.
like I get that there are some perks to stay, but the golden watch business, those are probably the people that are getting the benefits and the
Yes.
a bit of security for your retirement, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
I think
Right.
for a lot of people going into that, those things are not heard of
Nope.
or not available or something
Hmm.
that they have to do themselves.
Absolutely. And it takes, like you mentioned, a certain level of moving up or moving from one position to a next or even one company to a next to even have that be any level of reliability or even something that's available for you to
Right.
even have. Like it's not
Right.
even necessarily an option for a
Yes.
lot of people to even see. It's not even there.
Right. The current position does not offer those
Mm-mm.
perks. Therefore, you have to find another position so that you can find one that does.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so then emotionally, even this is kind of where the idea for me came from, just thinking about like the emotional toll that, switching jobs or just the economy and period have taken on people our age. I mean, if you've lived through the recessions 2007 to 2010 or so, the pandemic in 2020, inflation rates being at their highest. I mentioned the skyrocketing childcare costs, healthcare costs are going crazy, our nervous system is primed to expect for the next ball to drop, the next something we have to figure out. So, and I was reading through an article and it mentioned that economic PTSD, which is a really interesting term, but it makes a lot of sense because it's like we are really like primed and waiting for the next thing to happen to us. I really think it has changed the way that 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds even are approaching our careers compared to somebody or compared to the people back in the 1970s, like you mentioned we have to look at things a lot differently than they
Mhm.
would have looked at them, 40 years ago. I'm no longer trying to necessarily make my employer the happiest with me if when I get off work my children are not. Like
Sure.
I think I have or I'm looking towards having more time for those things that I've decided that matter.
Mhm.
So it's not necessarily always about making, having the best, fun money at work. I also need to be able to be okay once I leave from work because the
Mhm.
reality that we are seeing all around us are layoffs. And
Mhm.
like you mentioned, companies changing hands or, lots of people these days are very fearful about whether they are going to continue to even have their employment. So making sure that the other side of your real life is prosperous I think has become more important, or more at the forefront. I won't say more important, but maybe more at the forefront of our thoughts than they were 40 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that in more recent years, the idea of like self care and
Mm-hmm.
trying to set up those boundaries is not only something that, employees are advocating for, but also I think that workplaces are encouraging. So I
Yes.
think that there is a good evolution of the workplace there, right?
Yes.
But we've also seen some of those borders crossed. I think of like, our situation right now where we're online always. Like we don't have a physical office. That's great for the business because they don't have to pay for any property, but
Mm-hmm.
it also means that we don't actually work with other employees. Right. So I
Mhm.
think that having those boundaries to disconnect from an online environment, that might be
Yeah.
very isolating, to reconnect with our families at the end of the day. I think
Mhm.
those are more important now than it was prior to an online environment.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Are you preparing for a licensure exam in psychology, social work, marriage and family therapy, counseling, or behavioral analysis? AATBS is here to help. We have been supporting behavioral and mental health students to prepare for their licensure exams for more than 45 years, working with over 1 million students to succeed on test day and move on to the next step in their career. With products ranging from comprehensive courses to quiz banks and delivered live online, self-study online, and in print, AATBS has test prep solutions that meet every student's needs and learning styles. Visit us today at aatbs.com. That's aatbs.com and use promo code BHT15 to save 15% off your next purchase.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And honestly, I do think it speaks to, like you said, our focus more on, or even an acknowledgement of self
Mhm.
care being something that we all need, or it
Mhm.
leading to having a healthier lifestyle.
Yes.
I don't know. My hats off to people who work from home. I could see the benefits of it, but I need a person to talk to, or to laugh with, or to give a side eye. Like, what are they talking about in this meeting? Like, I need to be able to have that, that
Yeah.
banter,
Mhm.
with a person. And so, like you mentioned, having an online, always available work life balance, or not so much,
Mhm.
is something that we all, at this point in the world, and it's something that we all kind of have to look at. It does give us an opportunity to focus more on our families, mental health, physical health. And so I guess that perspective is just a different place than it would have been, 40 years ago, even.
Sure. Yeah. And I don't know if like your workplaces are structured in the same way. But as companies have gone through layoffs, it means that the work doesn't necessarily get smaller. It just
No,
means that it gets
less
divided
people.
into the people that are
Hmm.
available.
Right.
And so workplaces have sort of taken advantage of that in some ways where they're like, well, this person, he has 5 different roles. He should be able to take care of those 5 different roles. So when something goes wrong, and you've got 5 different roles and one of those hats are being called on, you almost feel like inclined to do that now. I think
Hmm.
that we've done a better job since moving online to sort of spread some of those responsibilities. So there's something were to happen, it's not necessarily on one person. But
Yeah.
like, I think from a work environment place, they've done a bad job of really dispersing work evenly to where, some people are kind of put in those positions where they're like constantly on. I get it.
Yeah.
If you've got like a, high executive job, you're getting paid, you've got access to some of those perks. Yeah, getting called in, during the holidays, I get that's part of the job, right? But
Yeah.
I also think there's a desire for that work-life balance that, was really blurred even just through the recession that we're
Mhm.
starting to sort of reevaluate. And thanks to online tools, like some of these things can get better in other ways.
Absolutely. Completely agree with you. Now, the other side of that work from home is that I don't work from home. My husband does, but I think his employer maybe even has even higher expectations because he doesn't have to leave the house.
Yeah.
So it's like his work can start from the moment his feet hit the ground out of the bed until it is time to physically go back to bed. So creating, you mentioned this earlier, so creating those boundaries as an employee is even more important. It's not as easy as sometimes just leaving the building, but physically, because you're not in the building. The building is your couch or your office or whatever at home. And so being able to create those boundaries. But I think quiet quitting kind of gets that negative connotation, but I think that that's what that is being able to
Mhm.
say, "Hey, look, my job is not my full identity. It is just something that I do during these hours of this day, and after this is over, I am not that any longer." And that can be hard to turn off. Like I said, my mom was a teacher for 30 years, but she is very much still a teacher.
Yeah, and you know what? I think part of that is like sort of deprogramming some of the stuff that we learned in school.
Mhm.
Like we're sort of given this perspective that like we're only as good as our grades.
Mm,
or we're only valued on the stuff that we output, and
yeah,
stuff like that. And when you have online environments, you don't necessarily get that visibility of all the stuff that gets done.
that's true.
And so, I think it comes down to sort of like the leadership in the environment to really step forward and create that standard of like, we're online. It's okay if you guys have to go to a dentist appointment
Hmm.
and step away from your computer. The work is going to be there when we get back. I think like some of those expectations are important to set and for those to sort of like live by example.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Completely agree. I work in a building and I won't say her name, but hats off to my manager. She is very much that type of employer. Like anytime I'm like, hey, I need to go to this doctor or this dentist, or my kids are actually sick today. Like, can you I don't need to be off of work. I can work. I just can't go. Like when you
Right.
she is, those types of managers that can say, you know what, do what you gotta do. Come back when you
Right.
can. You're much
Right.
better when you're focused anyway. Like if you need to go to the dentist and you can't go, you don't care about work. So you go do your thing, come back when when you're finished. So
Right.
having that level of balance is something that I think employers are starting to pick up on and offer
Mhm.
as a benefit when, some of the other benefits of traditional work aren't there anymore or aren't as easily accessible as they used to be.
Mhm. Mhm.
Absolutely. So, in thinking about the future of work, retirement, because career jobs aren't something that necessarily people staying with one employer for life is not necessarily, I don't even know that it actually existed for a lot of people in America. I mean, I'm sure it did for many. Like I said, my mom being one, teachers, I think many factory workers had that. We get one job, we stay there type of mentality, even though we know that it might not necessarily be realistic or even something that everybody is trying to get, do we still feel a sense of failure or instability even when we change jobs every few years? Like, does it look bad on a resume for us to have 4 or 5 different jobs in different areas? In a 10-year span of time, like, does that look bad? Do you feel bad for it? I know in your
Mhm.
experience, you've been in your current position for a few years, but I know when I changed from education to medicine, I did like I felt a sense of failure, like, girl, you are starting over. You were 40 years old and you are starting over. And what were you thinking? Because your idea of I'm gonna go to this job, I'm gonna work here for 30 years and retire, and then live my life is no longer what life looks like. So there is for me anyway, there was a certain level of, instability or failure with that change that took place. Now, my change happened after 12 years, so I don't know what it looks like for every 3. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, you know what? I immediately felt a disconnect from my parents and their
Mm,
work experience just on how I entered the workforce
yeah,
because it was so different from my parents.
yeah.
They started with a mentorship program that eventually led into full-time work. And during that mentorship program, it was paid.
Hmm.
My experience was that entry level jobs were looking for somebody with 3 to 4 years of experience
Yeah.
so they could get a free internship. So unpaid internship so that you could go and work with the potential of getting paid.
Mhm.
Now I was working in Los Angeles at that time and I was working a unpaid internship with 3 to 4, and my employer reluctantly paid me after the fourth month. So when I eventually got into a paying gig, I was like very grateful, but none of that had any of the perks of say healthcare
Mhm.
or 401k. So then when I finally got to that status where it was consistent, I had healthcare benefits. Some of those things like started stacking on top of each other to where eventually I had an employer that was willing to give us benefits like a 401k, but there was no match. So,
Mm.
you know what I
Wow.
mean? So we had
Yeah.
access to some of those retirement stuff, but the perks just were not what, my parents were into. And I
Right.
think because of those things, I've grown up in a lifestyle where I've made sacrifices to where I'm like, I'm just not going to have access to the same things as my parents. So for
Mm.
example, I'm renting. Like
Yeah.
I don't have dreams of owning a home.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I don't plan on having children because I don't feel like that is an expense that I could afford at this
yeah,
time. I
that's
mean,
real.
even now, like my health insurance our deductible has just gone up and up.
Mhm.
So I can't
Mhm.
even reliably count on equitable health care and
Yeah.
access as I
Yeah.
did, 2 years ago because
Yeah.
things have changed. So, yes, I think it's changing. There's a lot of scary things that are happening to the economy, even just, beyond rising costs, rising healthcare, and unstable economy.
Mhm.
I want to ask you, have you ever heard of the term quiet cracking?
No, I
S-
haven't.
Okay, so quiet cracking are it's like quiet quitting, but instead of the idea of quitting a job and with the a goal of reaching another job that might pay differently or just a better work environment, these are workers who are disengaged but feel stuck due to economic uncertainty. And I
Mm.
think that that's very interesting to label it, right?
Uh-huh.
Because I'm sure that there are a lot of folks that are sort of in that spot. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know if there's hope in, putting an end to that, but
Mhm.
hopefully, with more access to job opportunities, with the shift toward online employment, people might feel more empowered to quiet quit rather than quiet crack. But I
Right.
do think that
Wow.
that is a term that is important to label because I think it leans into maybe the mental state, right, where people
Yes.
feel trapped.
Yes. Yes. Because that changes the thought behind it, because quiet quitting doesn't, it just gives you that, hey, I did what I did. I'm out. I'll see you later.
Right.
But that
There's
quiet cracking
progression to
speaks
it.
to that I did all those things and I'm stuck here. Like
Yeah,
there is
and I'm
nowhere else for
burnt.
me to go. Wow.
I'm burnt. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And that unfortunately, I see that that's probably where a lot of people are right now. I mean, you want to hang on to the job that you have, whether you enjoy it or not. The times are so uncertain that we don't know what it may look like tomorrow. I've got some friends that work for places like Target or Google, and they're constantly, I won't say in a full state of fear, but there's some level of anxiety there because people are getting laid off left and right. And these are companies
Right.
that 5, 6 years ago was like, yes, I finally got into it and this
Mhm.
is your dream job, but then you have these emotional, up and downs because of the economy. We don't know how things will go going forward. It's definitely a scary time. When you mentioned you felt a disconnect with your parents, I felt it, but I don't know that I really understood it until you said it. Because when I told my parents that I was leaving education, they were like, "You're doing what? What are you doing? Well,
Yeah.
why would you do that? You're probably halfway to retirement by now. What are you thinking?" And I was like, okay, like I thought this was a good idea. Like I need something different because I was getting to that burnout point, right?
Yeah.
So I need something different. But
Mhm.
now I'm feeling a little ashamed that I'm trying something different. And
Mhm.
so that's it. On top of all the other parts, it's the things and the emotions that we get or the feelings that we get from our friends and family about what we choose to do employment wise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that a younger generation doesn't see that behavior as something negative the
Hmm.
same way that our parents did,
Yeah.
because when they see people jump from job to job, they see it as uncertain or
Right.
this person is unhireable. And I don't think that those are the same reasons why people are leaving jobs.
I don't
I'm
know.
hoping that when a person goes into the job career that they've decided, especially something like mental health, they
Mhm.
recognize that their degree isn't something that should be like one perspective, one note, one job,
Right,
that
right,
they
yeah,
really should see that it's an entire spectrum to a
yes,
career and that the training that you have access to can propel you to so many different opportunities. You know,
absolutely.
I think like the mono direction of college and a degree kind of
Mhm.
keeps us limited in a way, but
It
the
does.
reality is that the job market can be much larger than just that.
Mhm.
And I think just due to like the uncertainty of the economy and just business in general, like we're seeing like mega corporations buy out smaller mega corporations for
Mhm.
billions of dollars. Like the job market is just really unstable. So I think having to look at a degree and the skills that we have with a little bit more diversity
Mm,
and just recognize like your skills can apply to a number of different things. I
absolutely.
don't think it's wrong for, say, a philosophy major to be, say, like your product manager,
Hmm,
right? Because
yeah,
that the skills that they develop and the comprehensive thinking could probably offer a better tunement to the
Mm,
products that you're selling than, say, somebody who went to business school for 7 years. Not to
right.
discredit the 7 years, I just think
No,
that there can be a a cognitive spectrum in your team, and
absolutely.
that your degree doesn't necessarily limit you, and that job searching can lead to new opportunities.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, it really got as I was doing research for this, it really made me start to think about the idea of success and
Mm,
what our parents deemed as success and how that is I was going to say has it changed, but it absolutely has changed over time to now it's not necessarily this long-term tenure job. Like you said, get this college degree and that is the job that I do. I think it has evolved to more, yes, I have this master's in social work and a master's in education, but I put those two things together and do something. I mean, yes, I'm still a social worker, but I do something completely different and I'm able to use those skills that I've developed in another way.
mm.
And maybe
And
there will be another way after that.
and also you recognize that your life is more than just work,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And I think that that also
Absolutely.
comes into some of this behavior too, right?
It does.
Having
It
those
definitely
safe
does.
boundaries to, build a life and have a family,
Mhm.
that just gives you more foundation to fall onto when something like your work life falls apart because the economy isn't there. You have the
Absolutely.
foundation of a family, and you're getting value and worth and gratitude from that rather than just, say, your output in
Yeah,
work.
it's your job. Absolutely. We are more than just that our job titles. And
Mhm.
I appreciate that that is where we have gone as a
Yes.
society. While the economy and the things that are going crazy around us is not fun whatsoever to live through. I think it has created a certain resilience in our generation that allows us to say, yeah, that sucks. Okay. So where do we pivot next? Because this isn't
Mm.
it. So where do we go next? Where do we take these things and how do we develop them into something new?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
So as we wrap up today's episode, I'm really thinking back to that 4.5% unemployment rate. Like I mentioned earlier on paper, it looks like a win. We're doing okay, right? But numbers don't capture the anxiety of a college grad who can't find, their footing in a new career or the exhaustion of a mid-career professional who feels like they're running on a treadmill that's slowly breaking down. My mom's 35 years at one job represented a world of stability that feels like a distant memory. But perhaps the data is telling us something hopeful that we are no longer defined by a single company or a single title. If the gold watch is gone, then the pressure to stay in a soul crushing role just for the sake of a pension is gone too. Maybe quiet quitting isn't about quitting at all. Maybe it's about loud living, reclaiming the energy we used to give to a desk and giving it back to our families, our health, and our own futures. Because at the end of the day, the economy might yo yo, it's going to, but your time only moves in one direction. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of BHT Bytes, and we'll see you next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.